You hit a pothole this morning. Maybe not this exact morning, but this week. Somewhere between your driveway and wherever you were going, your tire dropped into a hole in a road that your tax dollars are supposed to maintain. And for a half a second, you felt that little jolt of anger. Not again. And then you let it go. Because what are you going to do? You've got somewhere to be. I want to talk about that pothole because I think that pothole is telling you something, and I don't think enough people are connecting the dots. Here's the fact I can't stop thinking about. New York State has the highest tax burden in America. Not top 5, not one of, number 1, or a photo finish for number 1, depending on which study you read. We hand over more of what we earn to the government than the people of any other state in this country. More than California, more than New Jersey, almost double what they pay in Florida. And I want you to hold that in one hand. Now, in the other hand, I want you to hold the pothole. Hold the bridge on your commute that's been under repair since you can remember. Hold the train that's late. Hold the project the governor cut the ribbon on that came in a decade late and billions over budget. Because the question of this whole episode, the question I think should be at the center of New York politics, and somehow never is really simple. We pay the most. So where does it go? What are we actually buying? And why does a state that taxes its people more than anyone in America somehow build slower, cost more, and deliver less than governments that tax their people a fraction of what we pay? That's not a rhetorical question. I went and got the answer, and I'm going to walk you through it, project by project, number by number, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to work. Let me start underground. On New Year's Day 2017, New York City opened 3 new subway stations on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. The 2nd Avenue Subway, Phase 1. Q train up 2nd Avenue, 3 stops, 72nd Street, 86th, 96th. Beautiful stations, honestly. Wide platforms, mosaic art on the walls. People were genuinely happy, and they should have been. It was the first major subway expansion in the city in half a century. Here's what almost nobody in those celebratory news clips mentioned. That stretch of subway, about 1.75 miles, is the most expensive subway line ever built, anywhere on Earth, in the history of the human race digging tunnels. The number is about $2.5 billion per mile. Now, that number doesn't mean anything to you yet because you have nothing to compare it to. So let me give you the comparison, and this is where it stops being an abstraction and starts making you a little sick. There's a research team at NYU, the Marin Institute, that has spent years building a database of subway and rail projects all over the world. More than 900 projects, nearly 60 countries. They did the boring, unglamorous work of figuring out what it actually costs to dig a subway on this planet. And here's what they found. The global average is somewhere around $350 million a mile. New York's 2nd Avenue subway costs roughly 8 to 12 times more than comparable lines in Italy, in Turkey, in Sweden, in Spain, in France. Dig a subway on the Upper East Side, and it costs about 20 times what it costs to dig one in Seoul, South Korea, 10 times what it costs in Paris. Same century, same technology, same tunnel boring machines, literally in some cases, machines built by the same companies. 20 times the price. And it gets worse because Phase 1 was the cheap part. Phase 2, the extension up into East Harlem, which the community up there has been promised for, and I'm not exaggerating, about 80 years. That phase is projected to cost around $4 billion per mile, almost double Phase 1, which is already the world record. Let me put Phase 2 another way, because this metric knocked me flat when I read it. You take the total cost, you divide it by the number of people expected to ride it every day, and you get the cost per rider. For Phase 2 of the 2nd Avenue subway, that number is about $62,000 per rider. We're spending, per daily rider, more than the price of a brand new car to move them 1.5 miles up an avenue. So the obvious question is, Why? Why here? Why us? Are we digging through something special? Is Manhattan schist made of diamonds? No. Researchers looked, and the answer isn't geology, and it isn't 24-hour service, and it isn't the excuses the agency gives. The answer is us. The answer is how we govern. Here's a few of the actual reasons, and I want you to notice a pattern. Number one, the way we bid these contracts kills competition. When they went to dig the tunnel for phase 1, only 2 companies bid on it. 2. In a healthy market, you'd have a dozen firms fighting to give you the lowest price. We've built a system so complicated, so litigious, so painful to work with that most of the world's best builders take one look at a New York contract and walk away. So the 2 who show up know they've got you. The final digging cost came in 20% over the estimate. Number 2, the phasing itself. To get the votes and the federal money, we chop these giant projects into little phases. Sounds prudent, right? Except it means you do the expensive setup work, launching the tunnel boring machine, the environmental studies, the mobilization, over and over again, once for each phase instead of once for the whole thing. We literally pay the setup fee multiple times because we couldn't commit up front. And number 3, and this is the one that should make you the angriest because it's the most fixable, is what the researchers politely call scope creep. The agency trying to keep every neighbor happy, every other agency happy, every regulator happy, keep saying yes to costs that have nothing to do with the subway. Rebuilding a sewer line that didn't need rebuilding, repaving a street that wasn't part of the project, noise mitigation for buildings that weren't even affected. Every one of those is a reasonable sounding yes. Add up 1,000 reasonable sounding yeses and you get the most expensive tunnel in the history of the world. Now, here's the comparison I really want to sit on before we move on. Around the same time we were paying over $1 billion a kilometer for the 2nd Avenue subway, you know what Tokyo did? Tokyo, one of the densest, most complex cities on the planet, looked at their own subway costs, decided the price had crept up to about $500 million a kilometer, and declared that was too expensive. They put a moratorium on building. They stopped because they thought $500 million a kilometer was outrageous. We were paying more than double that and calling it a triumph. That's the whole episode in one comparison, honestly. A government that respects its taxpayers' money looks at $500 million a kilometer and says, that's too much, stop. A government that doesn't looks at over $1 billion a kilometer and throws a ribbon cutting. Remember which one you live in. Let me tell you about a train station most of you have never used and paid for anyway. It's called Grand Central Madison. It sits about 150 feet below Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan, very deep. We'll come back to the deep part. And it's where Long Island Railroad trains now arrive on the east side. The project that built it was called East Side Access, and it is, by any honest accounting, one of the most expensive pieces of railroad ever constructed by human beings. Here's the arc of this thing, and I want you to watch the number grow because the growing is the story. When this project was first seriously championed back in the 1990s, the price tag people were talking about was around $3.5 billion. Some early estimates were even lower, and it was supposed to open in 2009. It opened in 2023, 14 years late, and the cost, it blew past $3.5 billion, past $6 billion, past $8 billion, past 10, and landed north of $11 billion. Some filings put the true number with everything included at $12 billion, plus hundreds of millions more just in the interest on the money we borrowed to pay for it. From $3.5 billion to 12 for about 2 miles of new tunnel. Let me do the cost per rider thing again, because it's even more brutal here. East Side Access works out to somewhere around $70,000 per rider. For comparison, phase 1 of that 2nd Avenue subway we just talked about, the world record holder, was about $22,000 per rider. So this project managed to be more than 3 times worse than the most expensive subway on Earth on the metric that actually matters, which is moving human beings. Now, here's the comparison that I think should be printed on a billboard on the thruway. There is a tunnel in Japan called the Seikan Tunnel. It runs between two of the Japanese islands, Honshu and Hokkaido. It is 33.5 miles long. 14.5 of those miles are under the ocean. It's an engineering marvel, one of the longest, deepest railway tunnels in the world. Adjusted to today's money, it costs about $6.5 billion. We spent 11 plus billion on 2 miles on dry land, under a city we already control. For $11 billion, New York built about 2 miles of tunnel under Manhattan for less than that. Japan tunneled under the sea for 33 miles. You could have built the Seikan Tunnel and had billions left over, and ours came in 14 years late on top of it. And I want to be fair here, because being fair is how you win the argument. East Side Access does do something useful. It gives Long Island commuters a one-seat ride to the east side, and it gives the railroad a backup route into Manhattan, which matters. The old tunnels took damage in Hurricane Sandy, and believe it or not, still aren't fully repaired because fixing them would disrupt service. Redundancy is real. It's worth something. But here's the thing. You don't spend $11 billion for worth something. Transit experts who've looked at this hard will tell you the actual time savings for most riders is marginal. A few minutes, and some existing trains were already about that fast. The state spent a fortune primarily benefiting suburban commuters, while the subway that most of the city depends on rotted. And the deepness I mentioned, Grand Central Madison is so far underground that just getting from the street down to your train can eat up a chunk of whatever time the new tunnel was supposed to save you. That's what $11 billion and a generation of delay bought. Now, I saved the worst part for last, and this is the part that connects back to your pothole. When you overpay this catastrophically over and over for decades, the number 7 line extension, 2nd Avenue Phase 1, East Side Access, each one setting a new world record for cost, you don't just waste that money once, you borrow it. And then you spend years paying it back with interest. Today, the debt service on the MTA, just paying back what we borrowed for these overpriced mega projects, eats up around 17% of the agency's entire annual budget. Almost 1 out of every $5 that comes in from your fares, your tolls, and your taxes doesn't go to running a single train, fixing a single signal, or hiring a single worker. It goes to paying off the debt from being the most expensive place on earth to build. So the next time your train is delayed because of a signal problem from the 1930s, and a lot of the signals genuinely are that old, understand that one reason there's no money to fix it is that we blew the money being the world champion of overpaying. And now we're making the minimum payment on that credit card for the next 30 years. That's not bad luck. That's a choice. We just keep making it. All right, come up out of the tunnels with me and drive west, all the way west to Buffalo, because I don't want you thinking this is just a New York City problem or just a subway problem. This is a how New York does things problem. And there's no better proof than a shiny factory on the south side of Buffalo. Here's the pitch. Back in 2013 and 2014, the governor at the time, Andrew Cuomo, announces something called the Buffalo Billion, $1 billion of your money aimed at reviving Buffalo's economy. And the crown jewel is going to be a gigantic, state-of-the-art solar panel factory. The state itself is going to build it, over 1 million square feet, and equip it, and then hand it to a private company to run. The company ends up being Solar City, which gets folded into Tesla, Elon Musk's company, and the promises are enormous. The state's investment climbs to $750 million for this one factory. In exchange, we're promised something like 1,460 jobs at the Buffalo plant, thousands more across the state, and $5 billion in economic activity. Solar panels rolling off the line. Buffalo reborn as a green tech capital. That's the pitch. Now here's what actually happened. First, the corruption. And I mean that as a legal finding, not an insult. In 2018, a federal jury convicted several men connected to this project, including the president of the state's own Polytechnic Institute, the man running the whole development machine, for rigging the bids. Rigging the bids on hundreds of millions of dollars of your contracts so they go to favored, connected insiders. Now, I have to be precise here because precision is credibility. Those convictions were later thrown out by the U.S. Supreme Court, but not because the men were found innocent. They were thrown out on a narrow technical reading of what exactly counts as fraud under federal law. The underlying facts, the rigged process, were never really disputed. Prosecutors moved to retry the cases. So keep that straight when you talk about it. The conduct isn't in question. The legal label got argued over in Washington. Second, the factory itself. For years, it was a punchline. It sat there, hundreds of millions of your dollars poured into the building and the equipment, producing a fraction of the jobs promised and almost none of the solar panels. The state quietly rewrote the deal more than once, lowering the job targets and loosening the definition of what even counted as a qualifying job, so the company could technically comply. Think about that. When the results don't match the promise, in the private world, you get fired. In this world, they changed the promise to match the results. And where does it stand today? Here's the honest, up-to-date picture, and it's got some nuance. As of early 2026, just recently, the company finally reported it's meeting the job requirements. More than 300 additional workers hired. It's actually started making solar panels. And it's invested a few $100 million of its own in supercomputers on the site. So after more than a decade, there is finally a functioning operation with people working in it. And that's genuinely good for those families in Buffalo, and I won't pretend otherwise. But step back. It took 12 years and $1 billion of public money and a federal corruption trial to arrive at a factory that, at long last, hits job targets that were themselves lowered to be hittable. And that factory today mostly makes electric vehicle chargers, not the solar revolution we were sold. Critics on the left and the right, for once in complete agreement, have called it exactly what it is, a boondoggle. And here's the deeper lesson, because I don't want you to just be mad at one governor or one company. The whole model was rotten. The idea that was the right move is for the state government to play venture capitalist, to build $1 billion factory, pick a corporate winner, hand them the keys, and bet your tax dollars on whether it works out. That is not economic development. That's a gambling with money that isn't yours. When it works, a politician gets a ribbon cutting. When it fails, you eat the loss. Heads, they win. Tails, you lose. A state government's job is not to be a worse-run, politically motivated hedge fund. Its job is to make it easy and affordable and fair for private businesses, the ones risking their own money to build here and hire here. We had $1 billion to bet on Buffalo. Imagine if we'd spent it fixing the things that make businesses flee Buffalo in the first place. Okay, let's come home. Let's get out of the mega projects and back onto the road you actually drive every single day, back to that pothole. Because here's what I found, and it's the number that made this whole episode click for me. There's a national transportation research group called TRIP, and every year they put out a report card on New York's roads and bridges. The latest one is brutal. Nearly half of New York's major roads, the state and local roads you and I drive on, are rated in poor or mediocre condition. Not aging gracefully, poor or mediocre, almost 1 in 2. And that costs you real money, not in taxes, and a second hidden tax you pay without a receipt. Rough roads, congestion, and the crashes that come from unsafe conditions cost New York drivers a combined $40 billion a year. Depending on where you live, that's up to about $3,700 per driver per year in the city and its suburbs. Blown out tires, bent rims, wrecked suspensions, wasted gas idling in traffic, hours of your life you're never getting back. Let me make it local, because I want you to feel this one in your own neighborhood. Here in the Hudson Valley, drivers are eating something on the order of $2,000 a year thanks to bad roads and congestion. $2,000. That's a mortgage payment. That's a couple months of groceries. That's a vacation you didn't take. And you're paying it quietly, $100 at a time at the repair shop, on top of having the highest taxes in America. You're getting taxed twice, once by Albany and once by the potholes Albany didn't fill. Now the bridges. And this one I need you to actually take seriously because it's a safety issue, not just a wallet issue. About 1 in 10 of New York's bridges you drive over without a second thought, are rated poor or structurally deficient. That's official language, meaning significant deterioration of the deck or the supports. The ranking puts us among the 10 worst states in the country for bad bridges. And here's a stat that'll make you grip the wheel a little tighter next time. Roughly half of New York's bridges were built in 1969 or earlier. Most bridges are designed to last about 50 years. Do the math. We are years past the expiration date on a huge share of the structures we drive over every day. So surely, with the highest taxes in America, we're pouring money into fixing this, right? Here's the punchline, and it's not funny. In a recent single year, the state's capital investment in fixing roads and pavement didn't go up. It went down by about 29%. Investment in bridges dropped around 20%. At the exact moment construction costs were spiking with inflation, we spent less. The state's own highway superintendents will tell you there's over $100 billion in unmet road and bridge needs across New York. And here's the part that makes an engineer weep, because it's the definition of being penny wise and pound foolish. It costs about 5 times more to rebuild a bridge once it's failed than to maintain it before it fails, and 16 times more to replace a road than to preserve it. 16 times. So by neglecting maintenance to save a little money, we guarantee we'll pay many times more tomorrow. We are, as a state, doing the exact opposite of what any homeowner knows to do. You don't wait for the roof to cave in before you fix the shingle, unless apparently you're the government of the highest tax state in America. That pothole from the top of the episode, it's not a random act of nature. It's a policy choice showing up under your tire. So let's put the whole thing on the table now. Let's do the reckoning I promised you at the top. New York collects more in state and local taxes per person than any other state in America, somewhere around $12,500 per capita. That's not the tax rate on a rich guy. That's the total haul divided by every man, woman, and child. It is nearly 50% above the national average. We have the highest individual income tax burden in the country. So we're the highest taxed people in America. Fine. A lot of folks will tell you, and there's a fair version of this argument, so let me give it to you honestly. They'll say, of course New York taxes more. We do more. We have a real subway. We have hospitals, universities, a safety net, transit that half the state depends on. You get what you pay for. And you know what? In a well-run state, that would be a good argument. High taxes, high services, high quality of life. That's a legitimate model. Some countries do it beautifully. But that's exactly the problem. And here's where I want to land this plane. We are not paying high taxes and getting high-quality government. We are paying the highest taxes in America and getting government that builds the most expensive subway on earth, an $11 billion train station that came in 14 years late, $1 billion factory that needed a corruption trial, and a decade to limp to lowered goals and roads where half are rated poor or mediocre and the bridges are past their design life. We don't just spend a lot. We spend a lot badly. Those are different problems, and only one of them is about money. Here's the proof that it's not really about money. That NYU research team, the ones who cracked the subway cost mystery, you know what their most important finding was? It's what they didn't find. They looked, and there was no magic funding formula. No single reform, no pot of money that fixes this. The difference between New York and the places that build well isn't how much they spend. It's how they're organized. The Germans have a phrase for how to run a transportation system, and I love it because it's basically the whole philosophy of good government in 5 words. It translates to organization before electronics, before concrete. Meaning, before you pour a single yard of concrete, before you buy fancy new equipment, first you fix how the humans and the agencies coordinate. Get the organization right, and the concrete gets cheap. Get the organization wrong, turf wars, empty bidding, scope creep, no accountability, insiders rigging contracts, and no amount of concrete or tax revenue will save you. You'll just build the most expensive mile of subway on earth and call it a win. That's us. We are a concrete first, organization never government. And the highest taxes in America are the price of that disorder. Meanwhile, Seoul builds a subway for a 20th of our cost, Paris for a 10th. Tokyo looked at half our per kilometer price and thought it was scandalous. Japan tunneled 33 miles under the ocean for less than we spent going 2 miles on dry land. These aren't magic countries with unlimited money. Several of them tax their people less than we do. They just refuse to accept that building things has to cost this much and take this long. They hold their governments to a standard. We hold ours to a ribbon cutting. We have been trained, you and me, all of us, to accept that this is just how it is. That government is naturally slow and expensive and a little corrupt, and the best you can do is shrug and pay your taxes and hit the pothole and move on. I'm here to tell you that this is a lie. It is a lie that people who benefit from the current system very much want you to keep believing, because the moment you stop believing it, the moment you realize that other places right now are doing this better and cheaper, you start asking the dangerous question, the question that ends careers in Albany. Where did my money go? Now, I started this episode with a pothole. Let me end with what I actually believe, because I don't want to just leave you angry. Anger's easy. Anger's cheap. There's plenty of it. I want to leave you with something better than anger, which is a standard. Here's the standard. $1 you send to Albany should come back to you as $1's worth of stuff. A road that isn't cratered. A bridge you don't have to pray over. A train that shows up. A project that opens on time and near budget. A government that treats your money like it's yours because it is, and not like a bottomless account to be rated by whoever's connected enough to be in the room. That is not a radical idea. That is the floor. That is the absolute minimum you should demand from the highest tax government in the United States of America. And right now, we are nowhere near that floor. We're in the basement looking up at it. I don't think New Yorkers are overtaxed and the recipients of great government. That would at least be a fair trade. I think we're overtaxed and underserved. And those two facts sit right next to each other. And almost nobody with power wants to say them in the same sentence. So I'm going to keep saying them in the same sentence every week, project by project, number by number, until enough of us are saying it that they can't ignore us. Because here's the thing about the pothole. One pothole is an annoyance, but a few million New Yorkers who all decided at the same time that they were done accepting potholes as the price of the highest taxes in America, that's not an annoyance. That's a movement. That's how you take a state back. I want to build that with you. That's what this show is. That's what this is all leading to. So do me one favor before you go. Send this episode to one person. One who you know is sick of it. Someone who's paid the pothole tax and the Albany tax and never connected the two. Let's get them connected. Let's grow this thing. I'll see you next week. Same time. We've got a lot more to dig into, and I do mean dig.